4th Annual Grifties and the first ever live Grifty Awards. And now for your hosts, Uncle Hotep and Hotep Jesus.
Yo, no George, but I can't even breathe in this joint.
That's fucked up. He working on that Coon of the Year award.
Black people, am I right?
We've got some great categories tonight, including athletes.
We'll say what's up to your dad.
Season's COVID-19.
Who did you want? Hamlin? Hamlin's a sleeper. Hamlin's a sleeper.
Female, musical, celebrity, people's political grifty, the Hall of Fame, and a surprise category.
Y'all see we professional. We got the teleprompter and shit. And of course, the one everyone is waiting for, Grifter of the Year Award.
From podcasts to movies.
DJ Protocol.
Yeah, DJ, that's the time to do it.
This is not a grift. I really think Lil Nas X is a gay demon.
How dare you?
Unlike most modern award shows, none of these women have penises.
Women shouldn't speak anyways.
Y'all picked the blackest room for a black. Paint the walls white so I can see y'all next time.
All coons look alike to me.
Some of you white people too. Some of y'all look like you came from 8 Mile.
We're halfway through, no one's been shot yet.
But I'm going to say at the Grifty Awards, there's only one person more arrogant, more self-assured than me, and that's Hotep Jesus.
Grifter of the Year.
Clap it up for old Uncle Hotep.
Hopefully my kids will watch this and be inspired and stuff like that.
Fuck them kids.
I'm looking for my wallet. I'm like, oh, thank God he didn't take it. Thank God.
2, 1, boom. Hotep Jesus.
Of all the Jesuses I know, he's the Hotepiest. Social scientist and YouTube host, Hotep Jesus.
How the fuck do you get a name like Hotep Jesus?
The one and only Hotep Jesus.
Ryan Sharp, better known to the world as Hotep Jesus.
Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
Somebody said, what do you think you are, some kind of Hotep Jesus?
Ooh,
and
that's
I was
good.
Just like, ooh, that's sexy. Yes, I do think I'm Hotep Jesus.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special edition of the Griff Report. Hotep Debates is back. Today, without further ado, we have Royce White. Royce White, you guys know him, won the Republican primary, basketball star, Big Three. Shout out to Royce White. Royce White is joining the platform tonight. MLH, a.k.a. Marc Lamont. You know him from TV and academia. And the rules are very simple. We're going to have a 3-round format. First round, we're going to have 4 minutes, 2 minutes apiece for each gentleman. Then after that, we're going to take the gloves off and allow them to spar for about 15 minutes. And in the last 15 minutes, we'll be closing arguments. And at that point, I'll be more stringent in how I allow people to speak and no cutting off. In the middle period, if they cut each other off, I'm going to let a lot of that stuff slide. I got to be honest with you because I want to see how these two intersect. If it ever becomes a point where it's the audience can't hear, then I'll jump in and say, yo, you know, and I'll be fair and say who should give their point. Okay? Let's flip a coin. Mark, what you got? Heads or tails? Or Royce, heads or tails? What you got? What'd you say, Mark? Heads?
I said tails, but I don't care. Whoever want to. You let Royce decide. He can go first or second. Let him decide.
Let him decide?
Yeah.
I like going first.
There it is. There it is. So, you guys know what the debate is. It's election 2024. Kamala versus Trump. Royce, you're definitely an advocate of Trump. Going to set the timer, 2 minutes, and tell us why you think Trump is a better option than Kamala. And you're on the clock.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, brother. I want to say thank you to the entire audience for joining and anybody who watches it after the fact. Mark, I want to thank you for being here. I've known you for many years.
So I appreciate you willing to have the debate and have the dialogue. You know, as a Senate candidate here in Minnesota, running for United States Senate, as you just said, I won my primary this last week. I'm obviously interested in articulating the efficacy and basic sanity of the America First movement, platform, and policy approach, which in many ways is you take care of home first. Taking care of home first is prudent, but also it's biologically hardwired into our DNA as humans. You could say it's a tradition as old as time, and even on a biblical basis, the order of charity and the order of what should be your priority is that which is most local first. So I'm definitely here to advocate for the America First and MAGA policy approach. In terms of what we face, what I face as a candidate, what we face as a movement, what we face as an American society, and even more importantly, a global society, is a mainstream media and political hegemony that has tried to caricature and frame the America First movement, Donald Trump, and all supporters or candidates as being extreme. And I don't think that that's honest. I don't think it's honest in the least. I don't think it's remotely honest. You know, even more, furthermore, that same political hegemony is responsible for much of the corruption that is going on in this country for a very long time. And I plan to get into some of that as we go on throughout the debate in terms of prevailing political ideologies like the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, the role of the United Nations, military-industrial complex. These have all become themes of my campaign and candidacy, and themes that have gotten me described as a far-right conspiracy theorist and other pejoratives as well. So I'm happy to be here for the debate tonight. And again, I appreciate you. I appreciate the audience. I appreciate Marc's time. And let's get rolling.
Marc, you are on the clock, sir. 2 minutes.
You know, first I want to echo Royce's appreciation for this format, for this platform, and for him. As he mentioned, I've known him for a long time, well over a decade now, and he's been raising hell and causing problems from day one. And I always admired and appreciated that about him, because that's what we got to do, which is exactly where I begin right now. We're entering election 2024 with a clear urgency. We are on the clock as a nation, and we are on the clock as a community. I am open and honest about saying that while I care about everybody, the entire human family, my priority is Black people here in the United States. For me, caring about Black people in the United States is taking care of home. For me, the way to do that is to create space to be extremist. You know, I believe that we need a radical reorganization of our society. I think that whether it's our values, whether it's our economy, whether it's our approach to solving problems, we cannot go with the status quo. We need a radical change. The fact of the matter is Donald Trump doesn't represent radical change. Donald Trump represents a deep conservative commitment. In other words, not changing America back to, or not changing America to something new, but if anything, making America what it used to be. Again, making America great again, with a particular vision of a Reagan era greatness in mind. He ain't talking about slavery, but he's talking about the 80s. He's talking about a particular economic mode of production, a particular cultural formation. And I'm saying that doesn't work. Now, the obvious rebuttal that I would make if I were somebody is, well, what the hell is radical about Kamala Harris? What the hell is changing the status quo with Kamala Harris? The answer is simple. Nothing. Kamala Harris is not radical. Kamala Harris is the status quo. Kamala Harris is corporate. Kamala Harris does represent some of the worst excesses of our nation, just like all these corporate bought and paid for politicians do. The point for me is not to endorse Kamala Harris. The point for me, as I conclude, is simply to say that I want to create just enough space with a different Supreme Court, just enough space with protests on the street, just enough space for us to fight so that we can get rid of all these Democrats and all these Republicans ultimately and usher in a new political order. But we can't do that. We can't do that with Trump.
Can't do that with Trump. Royce, you are on the clock. Go ahead. Start right there.
Well, I would disagree fundamentally about Donald Trump. There are many things about Donald Trump and any candidate for any office that's going to mimic what the status quo has been. There, I don't think anybody would advocate for a complete departure from the status quo, because that would often break out into chaos. But when we talk about the ideas, the fundamental pillars of Donald Trump's presidency, his candidacy in this race, and the America First movement as a whole, the hegemony of the American permanent political class since after World War II has been the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. And that liberal order has tried to promote itself as a liberator, conveyor of freedom and hope and democracy all across the world. But what they've really brought is war. And the third rail of government, the third rail of this global corporate community, and it is a global corporate community, is the military-industrial complex. For starters, there are others as well: medical-industrial complex, media-industrial complex, central, fractional reserve banking, central banking. A lot of these institutions are a part of the same sort of scam. Now, what we believe in the America First movement is that Donald Trump's presidency and the ideas underneath it were a significant departure from that status quo in terms of America being a bastion of freedom and, furthermore, independence and self-sufficiency. When we look at the hallmark, the sort of allure or draw into that idea of globalism after World War II, it's that all of our markets are intertwined. All of us have a joined global community. All of us are dependent on one another, and we all do share a global community. But self-sufficiency has to be the fundamental pillar of measuring whether or not we are going to be peaceful, prosperous, and so on and so forth. Individual freedom is the baseline idea of the America First movement, and we're not independent. And slowly but surely, we're losing our freedom as well. And I think Donald Trump is fighting that. Does he have flaws? Yeah. Are there things I disagree with him on? Yeah, but he didn't put us in any new wars, and he was willing to call out D.C. for exactly what it is, a part of that globalist agenda.
Marc, you're on the clock.
I don't disagree that we should be withdrawing from wars, that we should be taking care of home, that we should not be investing time, energy, resources, or weapons elsewhere. I think as a general rule, minding your own business is a good way to move in the world. Royce and I are not in disagreement on that point. My problem is that what Donald Trump often talks about, and it's not just Donald Trump, it's Republicans, and frankly, it's most Democrats as well. Again, I'm not a Democrat, I'm a Green Party member who, is making some pragmatic choices this year. The problem is we say we want to leave everybody alone, but our economic investments abroad, our political economy domestically creates the very problems that we then want to run from. For example, I agree with saying, look, let's stay out of the Middle East. Let's mind our own business in the Middle East. But the problem is we fund the proxy war. The problem is we send billions of dollars to Israel every year. And so the billions of dollars we use are the very thing that creates Hamas. It's the very thing that creates resistance in the West Bank, the very thing that creates Houthi rebels in Yemen. It's the very thing that creates all of these issues. I don't mean, to be clear, I don't mean we literally create them. What I mean is we energize and fund and help sustain problems. We benefit from the economic exploitation of farmers in Mexico. And then when they come across the border, we say, let's keep the illegals out. I'm saying if we want to be insular, if we really believe that we can protect our borders and really believe that we can be a nation that isn't as beholden to the global economy as we are now, then we also have to get rid of an imperialist and neo-colonialist foreign and domestic policy. And the problem is Trump wants to have it both ways. And again, he's not alone. Most politicians, Joe Biden wanted to have it both ways. Kamala Harris needs to say more before I know how she wants to have it. But at the moment, he's not alone, but he absolutely represents an old political order that must be transformed.
Royce, you're on the clock. This is the beginning of the third round. Royce, it's on you.
Well, first off, I think I've gotten much of my criticism from the mainstream media for being called anti-Semitic, and my position on Israel has been that nobody gets our foreign aid without conditions. Our relationship with every single nation around this world outside of the United States should be conditional, Israel included. Now, do we have a different relationship with Israel than other nations? Of course, our relationship with every nation is going to be somewhat unique. But my position on Israel is that we're funding every side of the war, and it's not the money that we give to Israel, or let's say it's not just the money we give to Israel. It's also the money that we give to all of its enemies. We're funding the Egyptians, we're funding the Qataris, we're funding the Iranians, and when we have a China-centric economy and supply chain and manufacturing base, we know that the money that goes to China from every single American citizen will end up in Iranian hands potentially because they're their biggest buyer of China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. And then if Iran, for example, declares war on the West, which they have, then we end up fighting the enemy that we funded. And I agree. So my other point about Israel, and I'll say this, again, I've been called anti-Semitic throughout my entire candidacy here. And I think I do have a very, let's say, nuanced and reasonable approach to the Middle East and the cultural identity and history of Jews and what's going on there in the Middle East. But my basic thought goes back to being in the neighborhood. If you yell death to America and I'm American, we have a problem. Now, to what extent we need to be aggressive and come and deal with that problem on the front end is up for debate. But in general, if you yell death to America, death to the West, we have a problem. So that goes for the Iranians and Hezbollah and Hamas. And I don't care what their excuse is. You can't come to, Iglehart and Dale and St. Paul and Rondo and stand out at the beginning of my block or cul-de-sac and say, I'm going to kill everybody on this block and me not have a problem with it. Okay. And eventually, if you say it long enough, I'm going to come deal with you, whether or not the problem was actually with me or not, just out of security's sake. So that is something that has to be acknowledged. But I will say, Turkey, for example, somehow gets a pass in this entire global neoliberal order of NATO and this other, sort of global alliance where Turkey gets to yell death to the West as well. And yet they're holding on to our nuclear weapons and nobody questions whether or not they should be in NATO at all.
Land that point.
Say it again.
No, I was saying just land that point, and I'm going to go to Mark to the second half of the third round.
I'm saying, it's not just Israel and Palestine. It's not just Iran. It's not just China. Look at NATO. NATO's guilty of it as well. Look at Turkey. After October 7th, President Erdogan stands up in front of a couple 100,000 Turks and yells death to the West, cross versus crescent, and yet we allow them to stay in NATO, and we're going to keep letting them hang on to our nuclear weapons. There's a lot of hypocrisy
Mark, hop in there.
and contradiction.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of American hypocrisy anywhere you go in the world, not just the Middle East, to your point. I mean, you could look in Eastern Europe, we could look in the Southern Hemisphere, we could look at South America, we could look at Central America. We could look right here in our domestic policy as well. I think we agree that the U.S. does not have clean hands. I would argue that the United States often has the dirtiest of hands. And you're right. I mean, the example you gave is actually quite apt, right? You said if somebody keeps running up on your block saying they're going to do harm to you, at some point, you're going to come outside and defend yourself, even if you started it. My point is, as the outsider, if I'm your homie, I'm going to say to you at some point, yo, bro, you started that. You can't keep starting shit and expecting people not to clap back, right? That would be my response to you. I'm saying the United States is institutionally and structurally committed to keep continuing to start shit. Some of it is the liberal ideology that we have to go and save everybody. Some of it is the cynical conservative or neoconservative ideology that we need to control everybody, even sometimes under the guise of saving them, right? Like, white men saving brown women from brown men. We're going to go and liberate the Afghans. We're going to liberate Afghanistan. We're going to liberate Pakistan. We're going to liberate all these people. So I think that's absolutely correct that we have to reimagine what that looks like. But when you reimagine what that looks like, you also have to have a different vision of what the global order can look like. It has to be one where we don't completely dominate the entire world. It has to be one where people in the global south, people in the third world have access to living wages. And it does mean for everyone's collective prosperity that we may have to give a little, meaning that, yeah, them Nikes might cost a little bit more, but now children aren't working in sweatshops in Latin America, right? Yes, I want the job here to stay in Ferguson so that police aren't collecting taxes on the street and shooting Mike Browns or whoever, right? They're not harassing people on the street, right? Whatever you think of Mike Brown, I'm just talking about how the interaction started because of basically jaywalking, which was not something you should be taxing somebody for. But Emerson Electric left the United States and went to the Far East or the Near East. And so you end up with no jobs and a town that's broke. And then policing becomes our mechanism for collecting money. So the instruments of war, the instruments of policing, the instruments of the military and industrial complex, as you accurately pointed out, are all bound up together in a system that continues to have the dominant and the dominated. And I'm saying we have to be willing to reimagine that. And that's the ethical and moral not reform, but really radical revolution that we need. I think that where you and I probably agree the most is that we think that the current world as it is ain't working. The question for me is simply, what do we do to change it? How do we get there? And who is the best person to get us there? I don't think
laying your point, Mark.
I don't think Kamala Harris is the best person to get us here. I don't think Donald Trump is the best person to get us here in the context of their beliefs, ideology, or history. But we only got two practical choices right now. And for me, what Kamala Harris gives us is not a different vision, but just a little bit more space for us to fight, a little bit more space for us to have actions and programs and policies that get us somewhere. I think she can be moved in a way that the Donald can't. That's all.
All right, let's land right there. Royce, this is the top of the fourth round and final round of this series. Then we'll open it up. Royce, go ahead. You're on the clock. 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, I gotta fundamentally disagree with you on that one, Mark. I hear what you're saying, and we do have to reimagine our role in the world. First and foremost, the America First movement believes in a radical change of how we deal in the world, especially around our foreign policy and foreign trade. As far as the material issues go, I'm not even so sure we need to be getting tennis shoes or any other, casual consumer products from China whatsoever. We need to totally reimagine American manufacturing, and that's probably one of the central focuses of the America First movement. Now, if we're able to do that through the legislative branch and through cooperation, if Donald Trump is elected or when he's elected, that's another story entirely. And there's a lot of the same forces who talk about those conditions all around the world who have tried to railroad and impede America First candidates like myself who want those basic and rational changes, and they call us extremists and conspiracy theorists. I've experienced it myself now, coming through a primary and now into a general election cycle. But I got to disagree on Donald Trump and Kamala Harris on face value. There's only one president in recent memory who threatened to pull out of NATO. There's only one president who threatened to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. There's only one president that threatened our fundamental relationship to the United Nations and these other governing bodies. There are two parties here, and as I see it, the core difference between the two party platforms, let's say Democrat and Republican, and I don't even like to go there because it's a wash. There's so much corruption on either side of the aisle. But ideologically, the fundamental difference is the Republican Party does prioritize limited government as an idea. Now, how that plays out, another debate, and nobody has a bigger problem with neocons than I do. But the Democrat Party has hung its hat on the infinite expansion of the federal government, and by proxy, now the connection to the aspiration for global government. So, the Democrats and socialists and all of these people who have the populism in mind on the left can talk about that from an ideological standpoint, but from an institutional standpoint, the Democrat Party is in lockstep with the globalist agenda, and by proxy becomes in lockstep with endless wars like the one there between Russia and Ukraine.
Mark, this is the end of the fourth round, then we'll open it up. 2 minutes, you're on the clock.
First, I think there's a contradiction between saying that you want to radically change the world and saying you're not an extremist. I think say you want to radically change the way the world moves is an extreme position. I'm
not the way they use it, but
no. This is a free 2 minutes, no cutting off yet.
Yeah, okay. But I appreciate what your point. My point is let's run toward it. I'm saying it's not as a debate point, but I'm saying let's run toward it. If the world is broken, you need an extreme response. Let's not let them have the language of extremism. Let's say, look, yeah, we are extreme. The world right now is on one crazy extreme, and we need to have an extreme response to it because this shit is crazy. I think that's an actual reasonable. You probably can't say this shit is crazy on a debate stage, but the rest of it you can probably rock with. When we talk about you're right. Trump has done some things that are radically different than everybody else. The Iran deal, the Paris Climate Accords, all these things. The problem is the moments where he decides to depart from the status quo, he chooses the worst possible policy choices. I'll give you a concrete example. I mean, although I think the Paris Climate Accords is a great one. And when you look at the Iran deal, the global community, there's a level of consensus that the Iran nuclear deal, that the entire sort of international community agreed with, in general, helped actually keep Iran manageable. It allowed for proper weapons or uranium enrichment inspections. It allowed for all the measures to keep Iran in a place of not proliferating a nuclear weapon. But we could also argue, again, there's a selective outrage here because we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but we're totally fine with Israel having one, even though Israel is not party to the nuclear non-proliferation agreement, even though Israel's not supposed to have one. We all know they have it. I've been by the nuclear facility myself. But again, we're selective and we can't continue to move in that way. I think we have to think about what these deals look like. Trump took an extreme approach and said, I'm going to cut the United Nations Relief Works Agency just for Palestinians, right? That's just one example. But if we take the Palestinians off the table for a minute, although I would argue cutting UNRWA created a level of desperation and urgency that leads to October 7th, that leads to us being involved and having to spend billions of dollars, which again, if you care about domestic product, then America shouldn't be spending billions of dollars there. We should be investing in our communities. We should be investing in small businesses. We should be investing in education. We should be investing in infrastructure. But we can't do that if we keep sending money over there to fight other people's imperial wars. So at the end of the day, we have to do that, but we have to do that in the context of global community. I'm not talking about global political economy. I'm talking about global community in the sense of, I don't want to withdraw from the United Nations. I don't want to withdraw from the International Criminal Court. I don't want to be departed from the International Court of Justice.
Lay your point, Mark.
There's a way that Donald Trump doesn't want the United States to be held accountable for anything. And when you end up with systems that are only hold poor people accountable and Africans accountable and global Southerners accountable, then what you end up with is a replication of imperialism and colonialism in the 21st century.
Ladies and gentlemen, first round comes to a conclusion. We're about to open up the debates. We're going to go back to Royce and we're going to open it up real quick. Let's show some love to the people. Shout out to C. Mun Snow with the 1 sub. Kamar Daniel with the sub. Shout out for the gifted subs.
Oh, this a real Hotep.
The Senator Loki with the 5 gifted subs. What up, Loki? Loki in the house.
This a real.
He's a fan favorite. Shout out to Roscoe with the 10 gifted subs. Shout out to Roscoe. What up, Roscoe?
This a real Hotep, brother.
10 gifted subs. It's Christmas in the chat right now. We're going to open it up. Royce, let's go right back to you. How do you respond to Mark right there?
Well, I mean, a lot was said there, but let's make a distinction. Israel has, and look, if anybody's going to make it seem like I'm shilling for Israel, all you have to do is go look at how much they've called me anti-Semitic and how much criticism I've had for Israel as a government. And not only that, but the narrative that exists between the West and the rest of the global community, even more specifically, Christians and Jews and so on and so forth. But the one thing that I can say with 100% certainty is that the leaders of the Israeli government are not screaming publicly to annihilate any of their adversaries or enemies in that region. They have not screamed, we are going to annihilate the Iranians. We are going to annihilate. In fact, one of the hallmarks of Donald Trump's presidency was that many of the Middle Eastern leaders were ready to sign the Abraham Accords before he, was no longer in office. So there are a lot of Middle Eastern countries there that have ideological, spiritual, cultural differences than Israel, but were willing to come together in the interest of peace. Now, part of their interest was also business and global business. So you get a sort of Trojan horse in that we're furthering globalism on the back of peace. And that has been the hallmark, again, of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. So I'm not saying that that's the best and final answer. But as far as who's allowed to have nuclear weapons or not, again, when a country's leaders openly say death to my country and death to me as a citizen, I have to take that differently than the encroachment, let's say, of Israel, rightful criticism, on their neighbors, on the Palestinians and settlements and those things are different threats and risks and let's say, different transgressions, different, national security considerations than a country that openly says death to the West every time they get a chance. I'm just not jacking that. Like, if you say I'm going to shoot you the first time I get a chance, I'm not going to let you have a pistol if I can help it. Now, if I can't help it, I got to deal with you the way that I have to. I don't have a choice in the matter. But if I have a choice, I don't want to be a part of the United Nations that pretends to oversee Iranian nuclear development, because I don't believe that they have the surveillance that they think they do. I don't, and on the same accord, and on the same line of thought, my criticism of Israel after October 7th was that they made the claim they could go into Palestine and precisely locate Hamas separate from the rest of the Palestinians, when the lead up to October 7th would suggest that they have a crisis of intelligence that didn't allow them to see the attack coming. And if you can't see the attack coming, then you can't tell me in good conscience that you can precisely go and extract Hamas from the rest of the Palestinian population. So I see the contradiction, the hypocrisy, but we are now at a stage in this country and this world community where we have to go even deeper than some of those surface issues and think about fundamental things again, like the America First movement, the MAGA movement, and Donald Trump himself were the first manifestation of significant political momentum in this country that totally repudiated the direction that globalism and the post-World War II Democrat liberal order have taken us. And I don't think anybody can deny that. I mean, Joe Biden, Kamala, pick any one of them. They can say what they want about culture here in this country between blacks and whites and women and men, gays and straights, or the religious and atheists. But when push comes to shove, all of that ends up being WWE, so they can continue to steal your money. And they are stealing your money, and they're bragging about it. So, and if there's one thing I'll say, and then I'll kick it back to Mark, if there's one constant of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order and this permanent political class, the one constant is that they talk about equality, but the only thing equal that's happened is that people have gotten their money taken from them, stolen from them equally. And the justification is usually basic, universal basic income will be the end, but people's needs all around the world. Look, I want to be as helpful as possible, but when you're $36 trillion in debt, some people got to fend for themselves, and it's not a matter of choice. It's out of basic necessity and what can and can't be done.
So you said a lot of things there that are powerful and that I want to mainly disagree with. I think you're correct that all threats aren't the same. But I think that what white supremacy does, and it permeates American foreign policy and our media discourse in such a way that the way we even talk about problems and frame problems makes brown and black people look wild and crazy and violent and reckless, and it makes white people not seem so. And the reason I give that example is, when you say, well, Hamas and Hezbollah and these other groups have very clearly said, we're going to destroy the West, we're coming for the West. But Netanyahu, contrary to what you just said, absolutely has called for the destruction and devastation of the Palestinian people. You've had people in his Knesset, you've had people in his administration, you've had people in his war cabinet.
Wait a second. You think I'm a fan of Bibi Netanyahu?
No, not at all. I'm
Okay.
just challenging the facticity of the point you made that he
No,
has.
but the one distinction I'll make.
Let me finish.
Okay,
the point.
go ahead.
I'm just going to read one quote from Netanyahu where he said, "Remember what Amalek has done to you." Right? He said Hamas is committed to completely eliminating this evil from the world.
This was after October 7th, right? I just want to get the time period right.
That's exactly right. So
but this is recent.
Yeah, that's what I could go back multiple times, right?
Okay.
Because remember, the formation of Israel itself is not people encroaching on their neighbors as you characterize it. It was settler colonial land theft. They literally it would be like saying we encroached on the Native Americans here in America. We didn't encroach on them. We took their land. We killed them. We committed genocide. We committed ethnic cleansing. And I'm saying that that's what's happening there. And when Netanyahu uses the Bible and Amalek in the book of Samuel to talk about killing the women, the children, the infants, the babies, and his entire war cabinet does the same thing, I'm just saying, and I think you would concede this point, that he's going beyond just tough talk. He's getting into the same place that all white supremacist settler colonial leaders have done. And I think you're right. You don't like Netanyahu, but I'm saying that it's not enough.
I'm not saying I don't like him. What I'll say is I take him for what he is.
Fair enough. And I'm saying that what he is just the business manager of a neo-colonial ethno-state in the same way that every US president in some form or fashion is managing the same empire, and you can get different drivers, but you don't necessarily get a different direction. And to your point about how sort of the left, or not, it's not really the left, but how the Democratic Party, who I don't regard as the real left mostly, the Democratic Party has kind of replicated, or even maybe even worse, in some of our most destructive foreign policies and most destructive practices as a nation. I don't disagree. I'm saying the same thing you're saying. And that's why, if it were up to me, if I were deciding my presidential choice purely based on foreign policy, I may make a different decision. So you and I might not disagree about the foreign policy. I mean, we will disagree about the foreign policy, but that's not where I hang my hat. Again, I said Black America first. I said, as a descendant of American slavery, as a Black person whose family on both sides has been here since day one, I'm saying, how do we get what's ours? I'm not asking for a handout or a check only, although I do think we deserve a check to repair the damage done. I'm also saying we need investments in our community. We need space to build. We need space to grow. And Trump isn't just pulling out of global accords. He's also leading, and this is the last thing I'll say. He's leading, and he's sanctioning, and he's normalizing a set of domestic policies that leads to an erasure of our history in schools that would remind us of the possibility of Black Wall Street. He's leading to you might disagree. I actually want to hear what you have to say about this. Okay. When I look at Moms for Liberty, when I look at Project 2025, when I look at all of these.
Come on, Mark. You're my guy. Don't be doing that on this podcast, man.
These attempts to silence free speech and dissent. I'm saying, look, baby, we have to do better than this. And I'm saying, I want to hold space for Black people to do for self, but we can't do for self if we close the opportunities.
You my guy. You know, I know you a long time, but first off, let's take this one piece at a time. Let me start with the Israel piece again. I think you proved my point. Is there a hatred on both sides? Absolutely. Is it a passionate hatred that stems back since time immemorial? Absolutely. It goes back well before the formation of Israel, the modern formation of Israel. It goes all the way back to the days of the Bible. We all know that history, or at least you should, or you're not really informed about the situation there geographically, culturally, religiously, so on and so forth. But let's be clear. You kind of made my point, because although Bibi Netanyahu has said those things, you also affirm that Israel has had the capacity to carry out that destruction for a very long time with the help of their Western allies, their American allies, or as you put it, their neo-colonial allies. They've had the military capacity to actually carry out that destruction and killing of their enemies and their neighbors, and they have not done it. Now, whether or not the Iranians or the rest of those Middle Eastern countries who are adversarial to Israel had that capacity and wouldn't do it, seems like an entirely different question. And when I look at the uprisings and revolutions in the Middle East from Middle Eastern countries, but also from immigrant communities now all across Europe, as we're seeing, and even here in America, when we look at the pro-Hamas protests and rallies, I don't see the same sort of restraint. And maybe, and you could rightfully say that the role that the Americans, or that the military-industrial complex has played in the history or the trajectory of how Middle Easterns or Arabs or Muslims view the Western America, rightfully has them angry, resentful with the West. But the fundamental question still stands of, because we do have a duty to protect our citizens and our country first, we cannot be so responsible for our history. We cannot be so accountable to our history that we open ourselves up to annihilation today. And I think Israel is kind of in the same catch-22. And so, but going on from Israel, because I don't want to make it a Israel-Hamas debate. It's not clear to me at all that the way you frame this history is in favor of the Democrats whatsoever. In fact, if we talk about neo-colonialism and the colonial empire, we're talking about the British Empire. We're talking about post-World War II Democrat liberal order again that was instituted by a document or a doctrine like the Atlantic Charter, which was between Winston Churchill and Roosevelt. And the agreement there, in the Atlantic Charter was that the British would relinquish their colonial empire, at least on paper. Now, everybody still bowed to the Commonwealth and pays their allegiance to the Queen, now the King, but that was the idea, that British colonial power had wreaked havoc and created this disparity all around the world. And now America, as this rising power and sort of military and economic hegemony, would restructure that, would reorder that, would re-even the playing field and kind of give a catharsis for all of those who felt a sense of injustice and wrongdoing and unfairness leading up to that point. Hopefully we wouldn't have another world war. That was the conventional wisdom. However, the British sent their academics into our universities. That was the great trick. And so we ended up defending, I agree with you, the interest of Great Britain and a British empire where the sun never sets is the conventional wisdom or thinking about how the British view this, is that the sun never sets on the British Empire. So we have defended a colonial empire, and not to our own interests. And much of what my message and candidacy has been about, going around a place like Minnesota, which is 80% white, is to tell white Americans, you're not European. You're not European American, but also I'm not African. I'm not African American. I'm American. You're American. We're American. You're white. I'm black. There's a difference. Being African and being black ain't the same. Being white and being European ain't the same. And you can only see it that way if you view the inception of America and its founding values and documents and fundamental ideas like citizenship as being pivotal, as being central to what we have to protect, regardless of the history. And so my criticism of the Democrats and the neocons, and in my opinion, is that there is now a sort of three-way hegemony of neoliberal, neoconservative, and neo-Marxists that protect this world order in one fashion or another. They play three-card Monte and shell games to hide themselves on any side of cultural wedge issues. But the aim is the same. The aim is that there are ideas about America and American citizenship that are unique, separate from that neo-colonial history. And those ideas are separate. Remember, we fought a Revolutionary War to defect from the crown. So to talk about white supremacy, whiteness, or America as being, tacitly sort of incorporable to the entirety of Western civilization is intellectually dishonest, because we fought a revolutionary war and instituted a constitution that greatly separates us from our British and European counterparts, although we didn't uphold that. And I agree. And that's what we need to get back to. And that's a part of what Donald Trump is saying when he says, make America great again. It's not about the cultural sort of formation under Reagan. Maybe some people may mean it that way when they say it that way or they view it that way, but great leaders have to distinguish the facts. What we're saying is that one of the fundamental ideas of us defecting from the crown was that we would have independence, that we would have self-sufficiency, that we were going to departure from a divine right of kings because of the corruption of the church. And that in doing so, if we had a nation of shopkeepers, agrarian farmers fortified by the Second Amendment, we'd have a safeguard against economic imperialism. Now, many of our neocon, neoliberal, neo-Marxists have often, let's say, sold those ideas out to cross over back into a globalist agenda for their own political and financial gain. I agree with that. But let's not talk about it just in the framework of white supremacy and neocolonialism. And look, I understand racism as much as anybody. However, the business models, the ideas, the anti-American sentiment is not just along racial lines. There were Chinese, and when you say a neo-colonial, look, if you're going to talk about the British Empire, and you're going to talk about the neo-colonial system or the way that their structure of government or their business model. And the colonial business model, by my measure, was drugs, piracy, slavery. They're not the only ones who are guilty of that in history. They just perfected it. So we all are kind of mad around the world that they did it better than everybody else. And I don't say that to pat them on the back. I'm just speaking facts. But the Russians were influenced by it. The Chinese have been influenced by it. Many of the African nations have been influenced by it, and many of them continue to play the same game. My real critique of Black folks who criticize the Jewish lobby, let's say, for example, and I have friends like Kyrie Irving, I know him personally, who came under that scrutiny. My criticism of us, even here in America as Blacks, is whatever you say that the Jewish lobby or Jewish elites or Jewish international businessmen have participated in or perpetrated, you can't say it without rightfully placing some of the culpability on us for willfully participating. And that has to do with entertainment, maybe first and foremost. You know this better than anybody. You can't talk about the Jewish elites in entertainment and not talk about the black bourgeoisie who took the money. And the point of that is that your American values, basic ideas, are that we are independent and that the morals and ethics come before the financial and political interest. We have to get back to that. We have to get back to that.
So you said again a bunch of things, some of which I agree with this time, a lot of which I think is still off base. I like you. I don't want to make it an Israel thing, but I just want to push back a little bit because I think it ignores American culpability here. This isn't a battle or a fight that goes back since the Bible. This is a battle and fight that goes back to the end of the 19th century, and it's directly connected to the issue of colonialism. You know, when you look in,
but wait a second. You referenced. Wait a minute. You reference. I'm gonna let you go, but I gotta stop because I gotta stay oriented here. You referenced Bibi Netanyahu, who was referencing the Amalek, which is an Old Testament biblical reference. So obviously he was trying to invoke a biblical sort of a framework for the battle between.
Okay. But that's the sleight of hand of political.
Oh, you're saying that's dishonest?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm saying that's dishonest. That's the sleight of hand of political Zionism. It's a settler colonial movement that begins in around 1893-ish. And what they do, and most of them were secular, most of them weren't even religious, but what they did was they were getting.
For sure. Oh, I'm in total agreement about this.
They were kicked out of the burning buildings of Europe. They were kicked out of these places, and they landed on the backs of Palestinian people in what was then Ottoman Palestine, eventually became British or the British Mandate for Palestine, which was again an attempt to transition from the old school colonial model into something else, but they didn't believe that black and brown people could just be free. So we needed protectorates, we needed mandate systems. They needed to be our paternalistic guardians until we were ready for freedom. And at this whole time, while we were getting ready for freedom, they were exploiting the land, they were taking more stuff. And so the Zionist movement was not largely a religious movement, although there were significant religious dimensions to it. This is a political movement.
Mark, I gotta hop in right here and say, get to the part where you disagree, because we all know Royce's opinion on this topic of Israel.
Right, but what I'm saying right now is,
everything you're saying right now, he's gonna be like, yep. So just jump to the part with his disagreement.
Well, he said that it went back to the Bible, and I'm showing how it didn't. So I'm explicitly right now showing my disagreement. So what I'm saying is that, and it's important, and you'll understand if you let me finish why I'm saying that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm saying that because by framing it as a political movement rather than a religious movement, now we have to look at the political actors that get us there. And the political actors that get us there are the British. But after World War II, to Royce's point, now all of a sudden, the United States is the hegemon. Now all of a sudden, the United States is the dominant force. And so when I say that we have a duty, I'm disagreeing also with the idea that we can't be too beholden to our history, because one, it's not a deep history, it's a recent history. But history is both compels us to change course, and two, it makes us accountable. Saying that history, we can't be too beholden collectively to our history, is how we don't get reparations. Saying we can't be too beholden to our history is how we ignore how Black Wall Street was destroyed. It's how we ignore how Black fathers were taken out of our homes through a variety of mechanisms. We can't continue to ignore history. Now, which takes me to the next point that I disagree with, that you just said. I don't pretend that any of these mainstream corporate political parties have a stranglehold on the truth, or that they have the moral high ground, right? I'm saying that right now, there are a set of political movements that are explicitly trying to take things away from our educational system, trying to take things out of our communities. And here's the thing, I don't necessarily—
Don't be doing that. Why are you doing that?
Well, I'm gonna tell you why. Because, and let me be clear, I don't necessarily think that Donald Trump gives a shit about any of this. I don't necessarily think that Donald Trump goes home and says, let me figure out how to get Black history out of school. I don't think he necessarily says, let me figure out how to tear down some or keep up some Confederate statue.
Mark.
I think what's happening, let me make the point before you disagree.
Okay.
I'm saying that Donald Trump is very cynical politically, and he knows that he can form a winning political coalition, much like Bibi Netanyahu, by getting the right wingers, by getting the people who want to stop, who hate transgender bathrooms or gender neutral bathrooms, get the people who want open.
Mark, come on, man.
And what I'm saying is, if you get this coalition of people together, you can win the presidency, but the question becomes what's at stake. And for me, what's at stake is we lose a sense of who we are, we lose the ability to course correct, we lose our moral high ground, and it undermines the most vulnerable people, and particularly Black people, because I can't, and this is my last sentence, I can't make
go ahead.
Case for reparations if I can't show the impact that chattel slavery had on my people as a descendant of slavery. I can't make that claim if they're trying to turn the faucet off and not let me have access to the history, to the stories. And it's no coincidence that Donald Trump is at the lead, or at least the figurehead, not the lead. People like Christopher Rufo are the lead, but the figurehead of these movements.
Okay, one, let me go back because I got to address the first part about Israel. Okay. I have to disagree with how you're formulating the history. And one, this shows a significant contradiction of the Democrat, liberal, progressive, woke, left ideology. You make the claim that we should allow our border to be open so that people have the opportunity to pursue freedom, democracy, and prosperity in our country, which I know you've talked about is an issue for you, I would think, as well.
That's not my position. That's actually not my position. But
okay, but that if you have an open border and 22 illegal immigrants displace Black folks in a significant way, both culturally, politically, geographically, you do have an issue in Black communities by illegal immigration, whether people
that's not my position.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. But
I don't have.
Okay, maybe you don't agree with that. That's fine. But my point is this. The Jews were, in many ways, when you just said yourself that they were kicked out of different European countries for whatever reason,
Anti-Semitism.
Huh?
Anti-Semitism.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the point is that they were kicked out of countries mostly by a coordinated effort from the government leaders, from political leaders, or from political movements. They were kicked out of those countries and they found safe haven, or they were given safe haven, let's say, by the British after World War II there in Israel. And now they mean to hold on to that by fighting by any means necessary. It's the same claim that we make that Hamas or that the illegal immigrants from South America or wherever else they're coming from now, Syria, China, for some odd reason, their economy is doing better than ours by most metrics, yet we're allowing Chinese nationals to come across our border, which is complete lunacy. But we make the argument, or I shouldn't say we, the Democrat, liberal, progressive, woke world order makes the argument that we should allow that because these people come from a victim. They come from a place where they've been victimized by their recent political power or historical political power. So how can we say both things at the same time? How can we say the Jews don't have the right to fight for their own little piece of the pie and things at all costs, but yet we should allow Chinese nationals to come across our southern border in pursuit of freedom and the American dream? Well, that doesn't square.
No, it's totally squares because you're comparing apples and oranges here, right? If you're talking,
okay.
if you're again, no one has an issue. Even Palestinians themselves had an issue with Jews immigrating to Palestine. There had always been Jews in Palestine. There have been Jews in Palestine since there's been a Palestine. There have been Jews in Palestine since it was Israel. There's Jews in Palestine since it was Canaan. They've always been there. The issue was not inclusion. The issue was the lack of shared land, but instead a commitment to domination. In other words, you can come in, but you can't kick me out too. If I say Uncle Hotep,
but you're saying that illegal immigrants from Southern America or Central America could come into Chicago and effectively with the government and help Democrats like Kamala Harris kick Black folks out of our communities.
And again,
the Democrats and the liberals and the globalists are settling illegal immigrants in Black communities right now.
You hear what I'm saying? But that's not my position. Again, it's a straw man. I don't. The position you're disagreeing with and saying doesn't make sense isn't my position. You're debating somebody.
No, I know, but I'm talking about the contradiction of it.
But I'm saying it's not a contradiction for me because I don't.
You're saying that the British Empire and the neocolonial world order shouldn't be as wrong for taking the Jews or supporting the Jews displacing Palestinians, but we should allow Southern Americans or Chinese nationals to displace Black people in America. What am I missing?
The second part of that thing, that this happens, but this I'm not saying the second thing. You're taking a liberal talking point and assuming that I echo the liberal talking point. That's
Oh
not
no, I'm not. I'm just no. I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is articulating the difference between. I'm still back to some of the first conversation where I'm trying to articulate the difference between America first and the rest of the neoliberal, neo-Marxist, neoconservative world order.
I keep saying that's not my position, but I'm not telling you what my position, my actual ideological stance is. So let me be clear.
Go ahead.
First, a couple of things. One, to the first part of what you said, the difference is if Palestinians said we want to let Zionists in fully, or by whatever measure, or at the time it was the government, the British government, or the British mandate to allow immigration until the white paper in the late 30s. Point being, if a nation says we want to let people in, that's different than if a nation says we don't want to let people in. If the indigenous people of the land say we don't want you here, and outside forces impose them upon you, that's where the moral and ethical outrage comes.
That's what's happening here.
I know. Hear me out.
Okay.
What you're saying is, why is it okay to be outraged about that, but not okay to be outraged about what's happening to Black people in the United States? I understand the question. What I'm saying is, I am not without outrage about what's happening to Black people in the United States. That's my point.
So you agree? You agree we should close the border?
I agree that we have to do one of two things. Okay. And this goes back to my initial point. We can't throw.
I'm just saying. I just asked that question and posed it because if we're saying this is an issue and the border is an issue, then there's no way you could be for Kamala because she has no interest in that whatsoever.
You'll understand exactly where I'm coming from.
Let's go. Go ahead.
What I'm saying is that the if we had not exploited and caused the push, then I would not be demanding that people are pulled in. What I'm saying is, I can't kick you out and then not provide you somewhere to stay. That's the point I'm making. So to me, if we're talking about our actual political vision.
So then you just absolve, but wait a minute, you just absolved the neo.
You got just hear me out. Hear me out and you'll understand.
I'm just trying to stay oriented.
Let me do this.
Don't be in my thing. Hold on, I'll say this to you. I'm not trying to interrupt you to be adversarial. What I'm trying to do is stay oriented within these little segments. And if you talk about too many things at once, I'm not in a rush here. We could go for 2 hours. It doesn't matter to me. My point is, by my measure, so I can follow you, you just absolved the neo-colonial empire of giving the Jews land, because if you kick them out like the Europeans did, you just said that, then you're now responsible for giving them land.
And that's the difference. That's what I'm saying. Hear me out. The British are responsible and the Europeans are responsible for kicking the Jews out, but they didn't take the Jews in. They sent them to somebody else's crib.
No, wait, and that's where the distinction is. Hold on, that was it. Hold on, wait a second.
No.
Go ahead. You go ahead. I'll wait. Don't worry about it.
You once. Just let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what I'm saying.
Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
If you kick somebody out and are wrongly, I'm saying you have responsibility to take them in. If I kick Uncle Hotep out the crib, I can't say, Royce, I kicked this nigga out the crib. You got to take him. No, you got to take him. And what I'm saying,
that happens all the time in Black families and Black communities.
I agree. And what I'm saying is, I
can't handle this dude no more, but he does need somewhere to stay. You got to take him.
Right, but it's not the other person's duty more than mine. And what I'm saying is, the United States is the difference is, I'm saying United States, we're doing the kicking out, and so then we have to do something. I'm not saying the answer has to even be an open border. I'm saying what I prefer to see.
But what did we do to the Southern Americans in the Central Americans?
That's where I'm going.
Okay.
What I prefer to see is sensible and humane trade policy that just like you said earlier, isn't so much focused on conquering the global empire, but it's focused on keeping American jobs here. That's focused on making sure the people here have food, clothing, and shelter. And so then what I do domestically doesn't impact the Central American farmer so much that he or she can't get a living wage or have prosperity here, because now I'm responsible for why they're leaving. So I'm saying, if we fix the problem at the top, we don't need an open border. That's what I'm saying.
I agree with you.
That's what I'm finish. I'm like, I don't think
wait a second. No. Well, we're not disagreeing. I'm just getting the details out. But one thing, I want to go back and talk about the Jewish thing again, and I just want to touch on a piece of history. But first, again, you are making my point. If there is one thing that can be measured, that can be articulated about the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, and like you said, the political figureheads that helped us get where we are, then the Henry Kissingers who may have been a whisperer to neoconservative, or I mean, not neoconservative, neoconservatives going forward, but Richard Nixon when he was in the office. But anyway, Kissinger's ideology, Mika Brzezinski's dad, Zbigniew Brzezinski's ideology, Klaus Schwab's ideology are all the ideologies that led to this entanglement of foreign markets, and their thought leadership still directs the Democrat Party today. In fact, not only does it direct the Democrat Party broadly, it directs Kamala Harris and Joe Biden specifically. So there's no way that you could say this entanglement of international and foreign markets has any chance of being disrupted as a matter of status quo if we put the people in who openly bow to the altar of the people and the figureheads and thought leaders who created the structure.
I agree. So,
Okay.
so then we're left with two impossible, from my perspective.
But they hate Donald Trump. Kissinger, Brzezinski, Klaus Schwab, they all regard libertarianism as a dog whistle for MAGA and, Republican.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Not their perspective, but I think your analysis of their perspective is accurate.
Right.
I think where I
one other thing though, I want to go back to the Jewish history first. My read of this is that we have gotten caught up in this conflict so much that people are taking pieces and bits and pieces along the way, and we don't look at the totality of history since the fall of the, let's say, the fall of the or let's go back to the first Roman Jewish war. Let's go post Christ. And first of all, when you can't even talk about the Bible, that's sort of a sleight of hand to not really talk about the full context of what's going on there in the Middle East, because this history does go back to the biblical days. And let's follow the trajectory now. We say that this wasn't a recent thing. The Jewish-Roman War. This is the first point you have to bring about this conflict there in the Middle East. And I say that because, to go back to what you were saying, what we have to be responsible for because we kicked them out. The Roman Empire would then later become the British Empire by many historical standards. I think you would agree, but that's part of that neo-colonial Westphalian history, is that the Roman Empire fell, and then later on it would become the British Empire. But the point I'm making is that during the first Roman and Jewish war, they owned that land. Even during the days of Christ, that land was occupied by the Romans. Now, if you're going to make the case that going all the way back to the Roman Empire, there's an illegitimacy to how that land was handled, well, then you're in agreement with Christ. And I don't understand why so many leftists and progressives that would make certain arguments wouldn't want to acknowledge that Christ was in opposition to the establishment like the Roman Empire hegemony. But nevertheless, I'll say again, the Romans were in charge of that land. They owned that land. They occupied that land. That was Roman land. Regardless of how the Jews felt about the land, regardless of how the Jews felt about Israel and Judea or Palestine, the Romans owned that land. There's no historical debate about that. When the Jews rose up after Christ died, and they had the first Jewish-Roman Revolutionary War, the Jews lost that war, okay? They lost that war, and they were expelled into the diaspora. The Jews at that time had the namesake of those two territories, Judea and Israel. After they were expelled out for revolting against the Roman Empire based on taxes, the Romans, out of spite, renamed that territory Syria Palestina. And from there on is when that land had the historical prominence of the beginnings of the name Palestine. And look, I'm just saying that to give the history. Now, the Jews go out of the diaspora. Some of them go into, what is known as Babylon, and that's where you get the Talmud and some of those Jewish variations of their religious and faith and cultural background. Some of them went up into Russia, Ukraine, and some of them went into Rome. And some of them, went up through Asia Minor and into Europe, and this was the start of the spread of Christianity. My point is that there's a history there. There's a history that you can follow of where the Jews went. So I just don't see it as fair now, after the fact, to go back and say, oh, well, the Jews were kicked out, and so, the British aren't responsible for giving them a land by your standard. The Romans, and then which became the British and the European neo-colonial empire, had control of that whole situation from the days of Christ. And they let whatever happened take place. So they are culpable to solve that issue. And the way they solved the issue wasn't right. The way they solved the issue was to use that area as a means to justify the expansion of the exact same ideology. And that is my criticism of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order and Israel as a foreign policy in the broadest sense is that, yes, the Jews were genocided, were persecuted since the days of Christ, but it's not about the tragedy. It's how tragedy is used. The British and the rest of the new globally constructed hegemony of the post-World War II Democrat liberal order used the Jewish identity, history, and existence to further their own political agenda. And a lot of us in the America First movement reject that. And when Donald Trump says he wants to pull out of NATO, when Donald Trump criticizes the United Nations, even if he puts the temple, the embassy there in Jerusalem, he is effectively challenging the status quo that has propped up Israel.
Violating international law.
Improperly.
Yeah, so there's a few things. I mean, there's so much.
Because NATO, you would agree that NATO is basically set up in many ways to protect the interests of Israel just as much as Europe.
Oh, I mean, there is no.
So if you threaten to pull out of NATO, you're actually challenging that global narrative.
Not when you're augmenting that suggested policy with an open, unconditional checkbook, with endless weaponry, with a commitment legally and politically to maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge. Effectively, what Trump has said is, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Israel is strong and stable and lives forever. He said that as recently as yesterday, and I'm saying that is fundamentally a problem. I don't want to debate too much the Jewish history, just because I don't want to because I don't think we disagree on some key parts of that, but I don't think they're substantive enough. I don't think they get us anywhere.
Okay, yep. Go ahead.
I want to stick at the borders. I think
go back to the globalist thing, which Klaus Schwab and Zbigniew Brzezinski and how the Democrats are in lockstep. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to go back to the Romans.
Yeah, I got you.
But what I would say is, again, I think you made an interesting point about Kamala Harris, and you said, she doesn't have I'm not quoting you literally, but you basically said, if you're choosing Kamala Harris because of her border success or her border skills or border positions, that seems to be contradictory and problematic. I think you're right. I agree. I was the loudest critic of Kamala Harris on her border policies. Although when she yelled, "Don't come," that probably was the closest thing you had to agreeing with her on some of this stuff. But I think the challenge for me.
Yeah, I thought she was just doing that for effect, but yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I agree with the sentiment.
Completely.
I don't think anybody believes that was her genuine position on the matter.
I don't know.
It was more of a panic of political posturing, but I get what you're saying.
I frankly don't know what Kamala Harris's feelings are, and I can only go by people's political statements. Just like with Donald Trump, I don't try to assess Donald Trump's feelings. I try to assess what they say, because there are people who look at Donald Trump and say,
or the results. We can look at results and infer the motive too.
And that's what I'm saying. Both of these candidates, to me, in general, represent the status quo. Both of them have some positions that are different than the status quo and that move them outside of the status quo. But fundamentally, America is not going to be radically reimagined or reshaped with either person, which is why, as a person who embraces and identifies with the radical tradition, I don't think that voting is the primary way to radically transform America. And when I look at MAGA, when I look at the right-wing movements, when I look at monsters, I mean, what the right wing has demonstrated is that the way to win is not just to vote every 4 years and sit back home and watch TV. It's to organize. It's to join school boards. It's to control media. It's to control social media. It's to shape hearts and minds. It's to shift curriculum. There's a mass movement out there, and so for me, I find that interesting and frankly impressive. So what I want to do is not, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want to, as someone on the left, I want to adopt those approaches. I want to shift those things. I have no illusions that Kamala Harris is going to bring me some major left-wing revolution, because she's not a leftist. She's not a radical. I would argue she's not a progressive. What I want, again, as I said at the beginning, is
she's worse. She's a chameleon. There's nothing worse.
I think all politicians are, frankly. I think if I look at Donald Trump's statements,
not me. You're looking at a new one, so give me some credit.
But but you are not a corp. I'm talking about all corporate.
I know what you mean. I'm just messing with you, man.
I know. I want to be clear about that. I may disagree with you on some points fundamentally, but I think you believe everything you're saying, and I think you're not afraid to say what you believe. I think that politicians get elected to get reelected, Democrat and Republican, and they'll say whatever they got to do to get where they want to be. And for me, Kamala Harris isn't different than that. Again, I'm not, and this, to be clear, I'll be 46 this year. I have voted for 2 Democrats in my life, and I've been voting since I was 18. So it's not like I just have some abiding faith in Democrats. I typically don't support them. I just feel like at this juncture in history, there's an opportunity to build the grassroots third party movement. There's an opportunity to fight and struggle in the grassroots movement to win. There's an opportunity to change hearts and minds, to shift curriculum, to do all the things that the left has been doing. I mean, to do all the things that the right has been doing successfully for decades. I want to start doing. And I feel like my political vision is more easily attainable under Kamala than under Donald. Not because I think she's down with my political vision any more than Trump is, but because I think she's a little bit closer to mine.
You know, Mark, I like you. You know, you don't believe it. Listen, do you view?
I do believe that wholeheartedly.
I know you have to say, and I'm not saying you're being dishonest. I kind of am, but I know you intellectually you're trying to defend that ground. But again, we come back to this juncture.
Which ground? Just so I'm clear, I'm not sure.
Ground where you're defending that Kamala's a choice. I get it. My point is this. We come back to this.
I'm not saying she's the choice. I'm saying she's my choice. I don't. There are people.
No, you're saying that she's the choice that brings us closer to radical change. That's scary.
No. She doesn't bring us closer to radical change. I think she brings.
Then Trump does. You mean she does? You're saying she does.
I think she can create the conditions on the ground for people who want radical change to operate outside.
Tomato, come on.
No. It's not tomato, because I don't want people watching this to believe that you can vote your way to freedom.
Oh, amen. Amen.
That's all I'm saying. That's why it's not a distinction without a difference. I'm saying,
okay.
I want to be very clear about that. I don't believe.
But I'm saying politically, you believe she's the choice that brings us closer to radical change. You're saying in the final analysis, American citizenship.
I believe our interests are better served. I believe our interests are better served by making that choice. I think that's
okay. Can I ask you this question? Let me just ask. Let me ask you this question. Does it hold up? First of all, when you say third party, let's never forget that the MAGA movement is the genuine and most effective third party to arise in this country's recent political history. The reason you can tell is because upon Donald Trump's arrival and the rise of the MAGA movement, first, before you say that, it didn't garner the opposition from the Democrats. It didn't garner the opposition from the Clintons and the Obamas and the Bidens and the Pelosi's. The first people to oppose him was the neocon apparatus and apparatchiks in the Republican Party, like Bush, the Bush junta. They were the first ones to oppose Donald Trump, which by my standards, could classify Donald Trump and this MAGA movement as a genuine third party. What I think you have a problem seeing or acknowledging,
I would say Tea Party. It was kind of the
yes, the predicate was Tea Party for sure.
But I would generally agree with your point there. I think you're.
But my point is that all these other third parties seem to have a sort of resentment and jealousy and don't want to acknowledge the MAGA movement as a genuine third party because we've done what they've been afraid to do, and that's actually go into a party, mobilize, organize, generate grassroots momentum to actually take the party. And the MAGA movement.
But hear what I said. Remember what I just said? I said I saw what they did. I watched them play the long game. I watched their strategies in and outside the voting. And I'm not saying I'm not giving them credit.
My point is, if you're not,
I want to do the same thing.
I'm saying it for a reason on a political basis. Fundamentally, if your allegiance right now is to the idea that only third parties that break from the bifurcated two political party hegemony, then just on a principled basis about how you feel regarding parties and third parties, if you acknowledge that the MAGA movement is the genuine third party in the race right now that has risen up in recent history, then you should be placing your vote for the MAGA movement.
Here's why it doesn't make sense. Two things. One, just because it's an effective third party doesn't mean that I agree with the ideology, right? Okay. So you're effective, but we don't share the same values.
Good. So now we're getting back to the ideas. I'm glad. Okay.
Yeah. So I
don't just want to thinly veil this about party and which structures and power bases have the chance to change things. It's not about that. We're getting back to ideology. Let's go there. I support
it because remember the MAGA movement could have also infiltrated the Democrats, but they didn't.
Easily could have. Yeah.
But they made the decision to infiltrate.
Not so easy though. I disagree with you. We couldn't have done it the same way.
I didn't say that. I didn't say easily.
And I wouldn't call it infiltrate. Well, let me qualify this. First of all, I don't accept. I got to reject you on this on the outset just because I'm running and I don't want to misrepresent the party, the Republican Party or the base. Let's be clear: the conservative and neoconservative takeover of the Republican Party and republicanism was a departure from the fundamental ideas of that ideology. The MAGA movement restored more of that genuine ideological framework of republicanism, limited government, self-government. It's not really that we hijacked or infiltrated the Republican Party. Let's say we clarified things.
Well, I think it's both and, not either or. I think you hijacked it to bring it back to what you thought it should be, the original values, right? I mean, that would be the argument,
right? Okay.
But I don't want to quibble, but because again,
I was just making the point, and the reason I say this is because I think most Black people in our country rightly associate the Republican Party brand with figures like George Bush. Now, they may loosely know individuals like Mitchell McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and those people as well, but all of those forces are hostile to candidates like me. They don't want to see me in. So if your depiction or picture of the Republican Party, the titular Republican Party, is political icons like Bush and even Reagan some, and the conservative movement is only since the inception of Barry Goldwater, not conservatism, but the conservative political movement has only been around since Goldwater and Nixon. So it's not that old. Republicanism goes all the way back to Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves. So for the MAGA movement to get closer back to the fundamental root ideas of republicanism was a departure from the Republican Party, again, for Black people to understand when you vote for Donald Trump, you're not voting for George Bush. They hate us.
Right. Oh, they hate your asses for real. But that's kind of where I'm going, because I said there were two reasons. One was we don't share.
Would you take Trump over Bush?
Oh, hold on. I'll answer that. I'm not avoiding it, but I never got to the second point. One was an ideological thing. Second is because you all found your home inside the Republican Party, there's a strategic home. For me, at the end of the day, there's a strategic contradiction there, or challenge, I should say. For me, I don't care the names of these parties. I don't care about any of that stuff. I want Black people to be free. I want us to live the best, most ambitious, most successful, most prosperous lives that we can. I want that for the whole human family. But again, Black folk are my priority. That's what I want. And I don't care what party. You could call a party anything. But the reason why I think the difference, again, I recognize that there are multiple third parties in the Tea Party and then ultimately the MAGA movement as a response to lots of things, including the election of Obama, creates this opportunity for an outside agitator, an outside
rightfully so,
an outside political movement to pull a party in its direction. I want to pull a party in my direction. I'm not pulling the Republicans to the right, but I can pull the Democrats to the left. To get, that's what we were trying to do just 2 weeks ago.
It doesn't sound like you're pulling people to the left to me. That's not my read of the things you're saying. What the things that you seem to want. First of all, let's not do left or right. And even my mentor, Steve Bannon, is unjustly incarcerated because he is considered the intellectual thought leader of this nationalist populist movement, not only here in America, but all around the world, and specifically has tried to liaison to Black and Hispanic working class citizens to join the party, which had been kept out, stonewalled culturally by the titular heads of the Republican Party for many, many years. And that's part of the reason why we have this sort of racial divide of Democrats and Republicans. But he has always said that we're so far right, we're almost left. And
right, but that's why mostly I've only been responding to your ideas. So I could see why it may sound like we're not that far apart, because I haven't expressed as many of mine.
Okay.
So for example, I believe in the abolition of prisons, right? I believe that we can imagine and construct a world without prisons.
Prisons.
Yeah, that is absolutely a left-wing position. That's not if I were to say I want us to end all these senseless wars, the so-called right and the so-called left, we'd probably meet that horseshoe theory. We'd probably meet and connect and say for different reasons, maybe we'd be like, look, mind our own business or whatever. It costs too much, whatever. Same thing.
But prisons.
There's a way with prison reform. We also may have that argument, right? Conservatives
Marc, you from Philly, man.
Yeah.
You from Philly, man. I lived in Philly, man. That's where we first met. You remember when we first met in Philly?
Yeah.
Ain't no Black people down there in Philly that would suggest that there are some people out there who are completely psychopathic that need to be locked up. There's some people out there who are completely and utterly violent, predatory, and psychopathic that need to be locked up. Now, whether you argue that every violent offense could be categorized as mental illness or mental health issue, I would agree with that. Now, I would save some, wait a second. I would save some room to say that some of the violent sort of disanchored behavior starts to move into the demonic. Now I know that's where many of the seculars would deviate and say, well, there is no such thing as the demonic. But fine, if you say that, I don't agree, and we'll fundamentally disagree forever. But okay, let's say that most violence generates from a place of psychological illness, mental illness, psychological unwellness. Fine, I can even go there. Now, if we're going to say that we're going to open up mental health institutions, you're not really saying we're abolishing prisons. You're saying we're going to call them something else. And that is a hallmark of the sort of sleight of hand that the left and the globalists do.
Here's why
Because
it's not.
at what point does a mental health, in fact, the left were responsible for closing the mental health institutions on the basis that they had become inhumane means of locking people up. So what do we do with no prisons with the people who are completely violent and psychopathic?
So a couple of
mental health institutions are out. That became that was worse than the prisons. They closed those down because they said those were worse than the prisons. So what are we doing with the young 18-year-old who, for whatever reason, has convinced himself in his mind that walking around with a semi-automatic pistol with an adjustment that turns it into an automatic pistol? What do we do when he shoots 3 kids innocently at a barbecue?
Yeah, I think you're asking.
And I feel bad for him. I feel bad that his mental state has gotten him to a place where he thinks that's his only option. But I'm not so empathomanic. That's my own word. I just made it up. I don't want people to think I'm trying to stun or nothing. I'm not so empathomanic that I'm going to let him walk the streets out of my desire for some greater global utopia. That's not reasonable. That's not rational. That's like saying we're going to give the Iranians, or let's say Kim Jong-un, who the left often criticizes Trump for saying I have a better relationship with him than other world leaders. We're going to let the North Koreans have unconstrained access to nuclear weapons because all of our impulse towards violence stems from mental illness. I mean, if we're going to do that, and I say this for a reason. I'm not just going on a tangent. I promise you that I'm pointing this out for a reason, because it points to a sort of spiritual impulse of what you have identified as the leftist revolutionary movements. And I like you. We're boys. If we weren't talking politics, we could hang out all day. But we have to get down to the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is, party or not, let's talk ideology. The ideology
that has ideology. Let me respond to what you said about, because you raised the question, and that's how we get lost, right? So let me respond. I want you to hear me out. Okay. So a couple of things. One, abolition first, it's not a sleight of hand, to be clear. I agree that if we say it's mental health and we lock everybody up in mental health facilities, you still have prison. It's a prison by another name. I agree.
Right.
I would argue that, statistics show that most of these issues can be resolved through other means. Abolition is about 5 major kind of principles, you know. One of, I won't go through all of them, but one of them is about, first, investment, right? And investment in the caring community. In other words, pay now or pay later. Part of why we have so many prisons, part of why we lock up more people than any other nation in human history, is because we don't invest in the systems that are demonstrated to stop people from getting locked up.
Amen.
So the first part of abolition.
Amen to that.
Right. So if that 2.5 million people in prison, how much can we slice away if we invest in education?
Because we have a death and debt culture and a death and debt society.
We don't disagree. So there's a way here that, first of all, you have to ask yourself, sort of, what does the world look like when people's needs are being met? Not just financial needs and not the cheap stuff, not the erotic or the sexual
material stuff, right?
The material stuff, right? Yeah. What does it mean when people's needs are really being met, right? That kid you described with the semi-automatic walking down the street, you know, what gets him there, right? There's too many weapons on the street that gets him there. Yes,
I reject that, but I know that's what
I hear you.
But
just hear me out. Just hear me out.
Don't be talking about. No, I didn't say. No, hold on. Wait a second. I like you, Mark, but don't be doing that. Don't make it seem like I made a point about gun safety or gun rights. That's not what I was saying.
I don't. You didn't say that. I'm offering my solution.
Got you. Okay.
We agree that the guy walking down the street with the gun is the problem. We disagree on the solution or even why he got there potentially at times. I'm offering my analysis of how he got there, not yours.
Okay.
I'm saying that I'm saying that we have we have a couple things going. I'm sorry, my wife just texted me like in the middle of the thing and threw me
Go
off.
ahead. No, you got it.
I was like, that. So one, we have to figure out how this person got there. Access to education, access to jobs, access to mental health, all of these things. We have to invest in it. Another thing about abolition is decarceration. Right? How can we get people out? Too many people are in jail for things that they could be out. We need more suspended sentences, more work release. We need more things to get people out. That's abolition. Excarceration. Excarceration means
like Amy Klobuchar, who locked up a bunch of young black men as a lead prosecutor in Hennepin County.
You ain't never gonna see me defend Amy Klobuchar.
Oh, so you vote? So you're at least advocating that people vote for me against Amy Klobuchar on the basis of this prison reform.
I literally don't know enough about there's two things. One, I don't know enough about your platform on other issues to say. I don't even know your platform issue, your platform on that issue. I just know hers. And second, I also think beyond just when it comes to the Senate, obviously, as somebody not from Minnesota, I don't just think about how you represent me or my state. I think about the supermajority in the Senate. I think about
everybody, right?
I think there's other issues I have to think about strategically, not just.
I'm just messing with you, but go ahead.
I know, but again, in these circles, if I don't answer why I'm saying that, then they think I'm being coy or getting cornered.
I know.
I'm very clear about why I'm making that position. I know you saying it for a different reason. Beyond that, abolition is about excarceration. Right? What things does somebody really need to be locked up for carrying a beer walking down the street? Does somebody really need to be locked up for gambling? Does somebody really need to be locked up for weed? Right? These are all things that I think as abolitionists we can get away from. And honestly, if you were to do those kinds of things and invest in communities and invest in people, the prison population may go from 2.5 million to who knows what. And so abolition for me isn't by the end of next year or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, we're going to open every cell in Attica, send them to Africa like Nas on If I Ruled the World, but rather that we're going to have a vision of an outcome that can ultimately be a world without prisons. It's also a cultural reformation. It's also a social reformation. And yes, people are still going to say, well, what about the serial killer? What about the crazy person? What about that dude I know on my block that killed 5 people and ate them, right? I'm with you. But as you pointed out, I do think that that's a mental illness. And I think that secure confinement for people with mental illness is necessary. However, the reason why it's not just prison is one, even if I conceded that it was, I say, fine, if you say there's prison only for people with mental illness and we give them treatment, fine. But the reason why it's not prison to me is because rather than prison is about caging people and punishing people. You steal my TV, you get locked up, you come out, I still ain't got no TV, right? I'm talking about processes that are restorative, that are whole. Think about the person who shot Ronald Reagan. He shot a U.S. president in the head, and he got what? Treatment and care until he was able to return to society safely. To me, that is a different model than prison. That's a different approach than prison. That's a different ethos than prison. That's a different investment than prison. And again, that's for a restraint of the few. That's what my vision is. That's the kind of radical process. That's
whoa. Wait, let's be clear here. If we're talking about the fundamental pillars of my platform or beliefs about a thing like prison, this is what I mean by a return to republicanism for the Republican Party through the medium and mechanism of the MAGA movement and Donald Trump. Of course, there's that sort of thin blue line cultural critique that has been foisted by the powers that be, the mainstream media, to again divide the political landscape between whites and blacks. And I don't think there's a bigger issue, probably from a commercial standpoint, than police brutality. That's why Black Lives Matter is the organization that has become. But if we're talking about the ideas, just fundamentally, the return to republicanism for the MAGA movement is a return to ideas that we want to limit the government, and incarceration wouldn't be outside the scope of that. We agree. I think people in the MAGA movement broadly agree that there's way too much regulation, and that a lot of this regulation, whether it be criminal or civil, leads to entanglements with the government and unjust and unfair processes that we now see even being waged against Donald Trump himself. So I don't think that we disagree that too many people are in jail for too many stupid things. And we would advocate that the federal government be shrunk to a size where you wouldn't have the opportunity even to be incarcerated for crossing the street with a beer. I don't think you're kind of arguing what the neoconservatives and rhinos show up on the public stage to argue for the political theater of politics, not for what the MAGA movement really believes. And this is part of the hidden reason why they've tried to suppress the MAGA movement, because candidates like myself And I even think
Okay, let me ask you a question. I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to ask you.
We don't want the government bigger, so that would include incarceration. Now, do we think?
How do you explain Donald Trump? One, chanting, not just chanting lock her up, but which is symbolic and messed up and undermines that argument. Particularly
that has nothing to do with casual citizen, policing.
I know, and that's where I'm going. But when you talk about blanket immunity for police officers, when he talks about defending and amplifying police officers, Donald Trump has been very explicit about saying he wants to support and expand policing in America. He's used moments like 2020 and moments like 2016 as the kind of the news peg for it, but as a stopgap, Mark. He didn't say as a stopgap.
No. You're missing the point. Fundamentally, from an intellectual first principles basis, you're not seeing how it has to be a stopgap, because Donald Trump's entire political platform has been about the deconstruction of the administrative state and the federal government. As you continue to deconstruct the administrative state and the federal government, you will eventually and inevitably arrive at a place where the federal government and subsequently state governments and local governments won't have the funding to proliferate policing.
Do you see why I didn't say Donald Trump is cynical? Because when he's on the campaign stump talking about locking people up and giving police more and getting more jails and more handcuffs.
No. That's not what he's saying.
No.
What he's saying is that the Democrats
he's not saying what you just said. I'm saying he's not saying what you just said.
Okay, well, he doesn't say it like me. What do you want me to do? I can't speak for why he doesn't articulate things.
I don't just mean that he's not.
But do you agree with the fundamental? Is what I'm saying.
No. What I'm saying,
even if he doesn't say it that way, that is the overall trajectory of where we're headed.
What I'm saying is he doesn't express that. I'm not just saying he's not as clear or articulated.
He is saying it. What he's not going to do. Do
you think the average MAGA voter thinks that Donald Trump doesn't just want to lock more people up who are criminals and have bigger jails? You honestly don't think that?
You're talking to Mr. MAGA Minnesota. I know
you're
what
not
the MAGA
average. You're running for Senate. You're not average.
No, but what I'm telling you is I get contact with the average MAGA voter. I have a good vantage point on what the average American citizen who identifies as MAGA thinks. And when I'm out here talking, understand that the police issue, and we're going to get into this because I think I hope we got time. Hotep, just stick with me.
I don't have time. I got the role, man. I got the.
You got to. Okay. Well, here
to be fair, we have about 10 minutes left in the last round. But we might as well just keep flowing until March.
Oh yeah, we can do that. Yeah. I just meant.
Let me cap off what I was saying about Trump. What I'm saying about Trump is this: the policing issue has been weaponized against black people and white people just alike. Put black versus white, make off with the green. The cultural wedge issues and this is why I cautioned you and kind of gave some pushback. As soon as you start to go to white supremacy, I'm already skeptical that we're getting to a place where we're making it racial and the people who steal our money have cover to do so. And nobody, I don't think, can argue that racial differences in this country have provided a smokescreen for people of economic and corporate elite. Some of the same progenitors of that very narrative and cultural divide, like the mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News, who also hates the MAGA movement in many respects. I don't think anybody could deny that that this narrative, this racial divide, has provided cover for the government to proliferate and steal our money. I will say this: the police issue, in specifically, has been weaponized to a point where the argument is somewhat what you made is that every time a black person encounters law enforcement, it should be seen in a monolithic way. That every black person is essentially innocent because the whole system is guilty. And I just say that to transition to this, and I'll say this to end. I hope I don't know how much time we have left or whatever. The elephant in the room here.
I have one question before we get out of here too.
The question in the room here ideologically is. The elephant in the room ideologically is the presence of political theories like Marxism and how much influence they have on the left's worldview. And I bring up Marxism for a very specific reason, because the Marxist movement, the communist movement, and even subsequently the socialist movement are all part of the same sort of political, fabric, the same ideological fabric. And they all stem back to post-Enlightenment Europe, which is strange. I don't understand how the people on the left, especially black people, can talk about white supremacy and neocolonialism when an idea like Marxist came from a neocolonial empire. I don't know how that works, but we'll work on that as a culture and as a society going forward. That's why I'm here. My point is that Marxism, at its root, is a lie. And the left promotes it as a lie. The left talks about many of these issues along this line that Marxist, for example, is only an economic political theory. It means to deal with the unequal distribution of resources, but that is not the case whatsoever. Marxism intends to reduce the human existence down to price. When you reduce the human existence down to price, you're going to run into an issue where policing, imprisonment, and all these other things are at the behest and in the control of the elites who take over your society. And so Marxism is like, well, let's give all the power back to the people. Let's empower the people. But there's never been a Marxist or communist regime that gave broad power and control to some lumpen proletariat of poor working class. They only became the victims. And even furthermore, this secular movement on the left that wants to seem like or say that you can detach every moral and ethic from God and any form of religious history, well, then why is it that Karl Marx in his early days when he wrote poetry was so obsessed with the story of Faust and specifically the demonic character, Mephistopheles? You have this atheist and secular movement that says there's no such thing as the supernatural or metaphysical. There's no such thing as the eternal, yet your thought leaders, not you specifically, but I would argue that you probably were influenced by Karl Marx because many college professors were, that this Marx thing has nothing to do with the supernatural whatsoever, yet the thought leader, if Donald Trump had a diary a diary from his 20-year-old self where he idolized Adolf Hitler in a sort of romantic and infatuated way, where he kind of had a literary obsession with Hitler, he'd never be able to live it down. Although Marx can talk about Mephistopheles, a demonic icon in European history, a demonic character, and we're supposed to act like that doesn't have any inference on the overall impulse or desire of what the Marxist movement is trying to get at. And I say that again only to say that we are living under a neo-Marxist political hegemony on the left. And they can talk about prisons and poor and all they want to, but the corporate elites have also stratified the power. So again, I ask you, how does the Kamala Harrises of the world bring us to a change of the status quo when she's as communist and Marxist as you could possibly imagine? She's openly Marxist.
All right, let's bookmark there. I'm gonna let you respond to that, Mark. Go ahead. And then I have one question before we get out of here.
One question for each of us?
Well, it's basically one question, and you guys can sort of debate over it.
Okay, gotcha. The first thing I disagree with your assessment of Marxism and the metaphysical. I think there's far more robust and complicated space for the metaphysical and for the spiritual in the context of Marxism. Just as an intellectual point, Cornel West actually wrote his PhD dissertation on the ethical dimensions of Marxist thought. That was the book that came out of it in 1988, but he wrote a book that really gets at the question of metaphysics and spirituality in the context of Marx. And there's another way to read Marx. I would just suggest engaging that or engaging the work of Cohn or others. And if you have, other people should, because I think you get a more complicated analysis of Marxism. I disagree with the idea that Kamala Harris is a Marxist. She's deeply invested. I think that the word Marxism has become a catch-all for lots of ideologies. If we're talking about Kamala Harris believes in darn near unrestrained capitalism. Kamala Harris fundamentally believes, does not have a commitment to making sure that the proletariat has access to the means of production. I could go on and on about why I don't think she's that. But I want to answer, in the interest of time, I want to answer your fundamental question, which is why her if you're trying to change the world? Ain't nothing about her changing the world. And I think that's the right question. But remember, I would encourage you to think back to what I started with, which is I don't think she lets us change the world. I think when I was debating, or if you want to call it debating, it was more like a bullying. But when I was debating Uncle Hotep last week, and I used the example of 2 glasses of water, and I said, one is poison and one has shit in it. And I'm saying one is going to kill me. One gives me the space to fight another day. I'm not saying that the stakes are death here, but I am saying that Kamala Harris gives me space to fight another day. That is the option. And I'm not saying Kamala Harris is shit. I'm saying the Democratic Party is shit. I'm saying the American political system is shit. I'm saying that corporate politics is shit. And in this context, we're never going to get good choices who can win, at least not at the presidential level. For mayor, sure. For governor, maybe. For Senate, sometimes. But for president, it ain't going to happen. So ultimately, we're not faced with a revolutionary choice and a status quo choice. We're faced with two status quo choices. And the question for me is, how can I, and Baldwin talked about this in 1980 with the Carter-Reagan race, is, black people aren't, he said black people aren't voting for Carter because they like him or because they believe in him. It's a means of buying time. I want to buy some time. So again, I encourage you to ask all the liberals. I'm not a liberal. I encourage you to ask all the Democrats. I'm not a Democrat. Why you think Kamala's going to make your life better? Because I think they have to answer that. And I think there's not a good answer for that. But for me, that ain't the question. The question for me is, why are you choosing a lesser of two evils instead of saying I'm not choosing evil at all, which is my normal approach as a third party person. But this time I believe that we can live a little longer, thrive a little more, survive a little better if we choose this bad choice over that bad choice.
We're going to bookmark right there. We're going to go right to our final question. Shout out to Enon Hunnit for the 5 gifted subs.
This a real
Chat, thumbs up if y'all enjoying this. Chat, thumbs up if y'all enjoying this. It's on me, V with the sub. Mark Watkins with the sub. Enon Hunnit with another 5 subs.
This a real Hotep brother.
Shout out Papa Hotep with the sub. JC 80 times 5. All right, last question, and then we're going to let y'all go here. I really wanted to hammer on this point. I just want to understand. Mark, you said Trump is taking Black history out of schools. Did I hear that correctly?
No, you didn't hear that correctly. Okay. I said that he's been used as the figurehead. I said the people who've been leading that movement are people like Moms for Liberty and Christopher Rufo and others. What I said was that he's often been used as a figurehead. They put his face on that movement, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's, again, I don't think Trump cares about that one way or the other.
You want me to respond, or go ahead?
Yeah, Royce, what do you feel about that notion that Moms of Liberty is removing Black history and all of that stuff from curriculum? How do you see it?
And we didn't really talk about the culture wedge issues, and I appreciate that. I think we should probably do this again if Mark would be up to it, because I think we should get closer to.
Let's do it.
I think we should spend some more time on the cultural wedge issues. Now that we've gotten down to ideology, we've broken into Marxism and kind of this ideological split of the country. We talked about political framework, and many of us out there in the country, I know us in the MAGA movement, we agree on a lot of the criticisms of government, which is why we want to shrink it, almost an unconstrained shrinkage of federal government. But this is intellectually dishonest. I don't appreciate this part of it, and I think this is where much of the referendum in the 2024 cycle is. And, to say that Black history has to include the LGBTQ agenda or movement because there are Black people who are LGBTQ is completely and utterly dishonest. And from being on the Republican side, I can tell you firsthand, regardless of how it manifests itself in the public square, and I'm not saying that doesn't account for anything, because it does. But what I'm saying is that the impulse, the spirit to reject a thing like CRT has nothing to do with erasing the history of Black people. We want to talk about Frederick Douglass. We want to talk about Lincoln abolishing slavery. We want to talk about where this country came from a racial standpoint. The fabric of this country is Blacks and whites. The problem with it is that, and this is a problem about politics in general that I know you would probably agree with, it's become a common political culture that both sides of the aisle play this game where we try and smuggle everything else into a sort of figurehead issue, a sort of headline topic. You always have a bill that has a headline. This is a such and such bill, and then you have a 2,000-page omnibus with a bunch of other stuff that gets through, some of it often military spending. And it wouldn't be lost on me to find out that in many instances, the Democrat liberal order has tried to smuggle CRT or other LGBTQ legislation along with military industrial complex funding for wars. In fact, they've certainly done that when it comes to the Ukraine war. And we could probably go back and look at the bill for the aid that they, again, clubbed together Taiwan and Israel. I mean, that's the scam, right? So omnibus bills are kind of a scam that need to be addressed in and of itself. I know from being around the Republicans, nobody wants to stop Americans from talking about Abraham Lincoln, slavery, Frederick Douglass, and where we came from in this country. What we don't want to allow or concede to is that in order to talk about Black history, you also have to talk about LGBTQ history. That is completely and utterly intellectually dishonest. I reject it, and even furthermore, I resent it.
Finish. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
The whole, and this again, one way or another. Look, it's not me saying it. It's 51% of black men who now poll for Donald Trump in this presidential race, and you can't look at that and not go back and identify where black men are popping up all across the country at school board meetings saying, "Why is there a book here that has explicit sexual content in it that's so explicit, in fact, that I can't even mention it in this school board meeting, yet you have it in our kids' school library. You have given them access to this content in the name of progressing equality for the LGBTQ." So that is a referendum issue. And if anything is clear to me, it's that the LGBTQ movement, if anything has been hijacked, if anything has been infiltrated, the pro-black movement in this country has been infiltrated by LGBTQ activists. And I don't even think that can be denied. I don't even think there's a sensible debate. I know some people would say that a man can wake up the next day and be a woman if he chooses to, but then we're not sort of dealing with the radical complexity of nuance that we were when we were talking about geopolitics, where you have to get very specific about the details and agree on a base reality. If we can't agree on a base reality, that's part of the reason we can't have these conversations. And to go back to Marx to end, I don't want to take up too much time. To go back to Marx explicitly laid out in his political theory, in so many words, how Marxists and communists and subsequently socialists would use any revolutionary movement in order to forward their own political agenda. And we, as a black community, have been co-opted and infiltrated by Marxism, which is why they so openly spit in our face and try and tell us that the LGBTQ movement and the pro-black movement in our interest are inextricably linked. There's nothing remotely appropriate about that historical assessment or analysis.
Yeah, you suggested I was being intellectually dishonest by saying that people want to get.
No, I mean the people who say that not you, but I'm just saying in general that.
Got you. I would push back and say I think there are multiple things happening, but the removal of history and race conversation and such has absolutely nothing to do with LGBTQ stuff. I'm talking about bills that don't even raise the question of LGBTQ stuff. There are bills that do raise the question of LGBTQ stuff. I don't deny that, right? If we look in Florida, for example, I want to call it, I don't remember the exact name of the bill, but we called it the Don't Say Gay.
Don't Say Gay, right?
Yeah, but I don't like to do that because it kind of sensationalizes the
right.
bill, but it was HB 1550. It's the Parents' Rights in Education Act is what it's called.
Right.
Rights in Education Act. And they basically said it's unlawful to talk about, engage, mention sexual identity or orientation from preschool to third grade. And then after that, it has to go with state standards, which is very vague and obviously not clear. But I wasn't talking about that. I'm thinking about something like the Stop Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act in Florida, the Stop Woke Act, HB 7, not HB 1577. Doesn't mention homosexuality, doesn't mention trans, doesn't mention queer. And I feel like the trans issue and the queer issue can get thrown in there as a distraction for people who, as a wedge issue for people who might actually want Black history, but might not want to deal with trans
No, it's not, Mark.
This is my clue. It may or may not.
It's when you say, I'm telling you from the Republican standpoint.
No. I listen.
When you say that all things stem from white supremacy, that's also intellectually dishonest.
That's not.
When you say that the existence and the history of Black people in this country all stems from.
I didn't say that.
No, the bills, not you, but a lot of these bills that talk about Black history also make the Marxist cultural critique that whiteness itself is inherently evil, and I've seen it done a number of times. It's disgusting.
Let me finish talking about the bill.
It's dishonest.
But let me finish talking about the bill that I was talking about, and then that way we may disagree on it, but I at least want to disagree on anything I'm talking about. So the Stop Woke Act it absolutely shapes how you can talk about history. It says that you can't. It says that it prohibits any teaching practices that promote guilt, anguish, and other forms of psychological distress against any student. It also prevents anything that indoctrinates or persuades students to a particular point of view inconsistent with state academic standards. So for example, if I were to convince someone by law, I'm not saying everybody feels this way, but if by law, I couldn't, if talking about the fact that America was a slaveholding nation made a white person feel guilty or uncomfortable, I couldn't teach it by law, right? I'm saying
that's dumb. That's a dumb interpretation of the law.
But this is exactly how it's been weaponized. And this is why.
Okay. Now you got to talk about who brought the bill and if they were trying to do that. But what I'm saying is look.
Let me finish what I'm saying. This is my closing statement.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be able to make it.
I'm the new MAGA movement, but go ahead.
That's fine. What I'm saying, I was speaking about the bills. There seemed to be some question about whether there were legitimately bills that were trying to stop the thing that I'm talking about, and then it was offered that it actually wasn't about race, but it was actually just trying to stop this LGBTQ stuff. And what I'm saying is that's not what it's about. These were people. I've been to the school board meetings. I've been to the Moms for Liberty rallies. I've interviewed these people myself. They are very clear in saying there's certain kinds of race talk we don't want in school. There's certain parts of history we don't want to deal with in our history books.
Right.
And I'm saying, if we believe in liberty, if we believe in free speech, if we believe in the right to disagree, if we reject cancel culture, then we can't on the one hand say, and I'm not talking about your MAGA movement or anybody else, I'm speaking it right now about the movement that's in America that is affecting
cancel culture, like Dave Chappelle, you mean?
Absolutely. That's exactly
we should cancel that. We should cancel Dave Chappelle.
No, I'm agreeing with you. You're just looking for a debate. I'm saying
no, I'm clarifying. I'm saying
yes. You said cancel culture like Dave Chappelle. I'm saying yes. That would be an example of cancel culture.
So we should be able to cancel him, or we shouldn't be able to cancel him.
You and I are saying the same thing. He has been canceled, or they tried to cancel him. I'm saying that what was attempted to be done to him was an example of cancel culture.
Right, but you're saying the Republicans with these bills are trying to make sure that people can't do cancel culture. I thought you said if you.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay. That's why I was trying to clarify.
When I get cut mid-sentence, that's how it happens. What I'm saying is that I'm pointing out the contradiction between saying that not you, but that people don't like cancel culture, and they want free speech and they want robust ideas, but certain ideas are out of bounds. Whether it's criticizing Israel, whether it's talking about slavery, I'm saying if we're going to be honest about this, on whatever side of the aisle you're on, let's have the conversation, let's have the debate, and let's not be selective when we want a full conversation and when we don't. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think distinction.
No, let's have full and total free speech, and let's have all the ideas be out on the table. What I think many Republicans are rightfully challenging is that the universities, the academic institutions in this country have for a long time, seen a certain political tilt, and that because of that political tilt, the byproducts, the teachers that come out of the universities that now teach in the schools have the opportunity to predate on young people's minds with their political ideology, going back to ideas like Marxism and communism and socialism and identity politics and even the LGBTQ or other race-based.
We got to debate that. That's another debate for another time. I got to go.
Yes.
For time's sake. But got some family stuff to do. But
what I was saying is that what I'm saying is that what a lot of Republicans and white people in this country are rejecting, and I think they're right to do it, is that the Democrat Party and the liberal movement has used the schools to tell young white students that they should vote Democrat or be in lockstep with the liberal agenda because they are white and should feel guilty, and only the Democrat and liberal platform address black issues. That's what you're seeing in the rejection of how.
Uncle Hotep, let's at your discretion, let's come back and debate the culture issues. Let's talk about trans. Let's talk about LGBTQ. Let's talk about history. Let's have a focused conversation with 3 questions. We were kind of all over the place, not in a bad way. We had to figure out. It's like a fight. You got to figure out, But now we're in the 3rd, 4th round. So let's do that next time. I'd love to have that conversation. I'm down.
Super dope. Great conversation. I'm sure the chat would agree. I'm sure all of our viewers would agree. Thank you to the 2 gentlemen. Royce, thank you very much. Exhilarating information. Marc, thank you very much for coming back on the platform once again. I'm going to close out here. You gentlemen can go ahead and just leave the lobby. I'm going to take over and take some phone calls and serve the people. So I appreciate y'all. Whoo.